We got there the end of October of '58, and we had until January of '59 to kind of get settled in and everything, get our freight and so on. Christmas Eve of '58, I'd gotten quite a few tracts from one of our churches and stamped them with the name on it and took them down to a market there on close to Ekamai. And Ruth Ann went with me, our daughter. She was 9 years old at that time. Well, I told Maxine that we'd be gone a little while. I think I had about 800 tracks. Well, we were back home in just no time at all. And she said, well, darling, did you decide not to do it? And I said, no, they're all gone. I said, people really wanted to, seemed like they wanted to read them. And so I thought, well, since I can't speak to them, I learned how to say, Chun An Krap, please read this, or Chun Rap Krap, please take one. I learned how to say that much before we got to language school. And I decided that we could at least give out tracts. And so for 4 Saturdays and Sundays, I went to Batu Nam and managed to give out 20,000 tracts in those 4 weekends. And I guess how I got acquainted with Ajahn Tart at our seminary. He was glad to see somebody out doing that. But anyhow, language school came around in January, and we spent 4 hours a day, 5 days a week in school. I had about 4 hours a day at school and averaged about 4 to 6 hours at home on my homework. I really worked at it hard, and I tried to get out and talk with Thai people some. My first time to use Thai in public, I'd been in school a couple of weeks, and she was playing the piano at the student center. It was over there near the National Stadium at that time. And so I went with her that night to take her over there, and we had a guest speaker from the States. And so I said, well, I'd like to try introducing him to see how it goes. And so I did. I introduced him in Thai, and that was my first actual speaking Thai out in a group. But I tried to take advantage of every chance to use it. I made a lot of mistakes. Another feature that helped us, we got to Bangkok on a Friday when our plane landed. We stayed with Glenn and Polly, and we started to a Thai church on Sunday. It was called Dinsaw Chapel at that time, later became Peace Church, and then New Creation Church. But Ajahn Suwek was a pastor, and that we went to church there every Sunday, and I realized later that part of language learning is giving your ears a chance to hear all of these words. And of course it's mumbo jumbo at first, but after a while each words begin to make sense and sentences begin to sound right. I think it's like learning a tune, to a new song. You may not read the music or anything yet, but after you hear it a few times, your ears learn the tune, and you can tell if it's right or wrong and how to sing it. So we did. We really got ourselves immersed. Back then, they weren't using too many technology, not much technology or anything. We just had the books, and we had little cards to memorize. I took advantage of the electives that I had. I had a class in True Buddhism, and I had another class of play in church where you took part in reading the Bible and praying and preaching and things like you're in a real church service. And the teachers allowed me to, for our 5-minute speech was our first year test, and a 10-minute second year. They let me, I asked them, I said, they wanted you to write it out and then check it. And I said, well, when I preach, I meditate on it and pray about it and think about it. And I don't write it out. I might write it just little bit of the outline. So I said, I'd rather do my speech that way. And they let me do it, and they said that even though I made some mistakes, that they realized I was really speaking from my heart. It wasn't like I just memorized something to say. Then I had a lot of chances to be out with Thai preachers, and we went to several other churches. So my ears were getting exposed all the time. And it just began to come to me, and became comfortable with it. And so we were able to finish and move out to Chatsing Sao in September of 1960, and we're ready to go to work. People asked me how long it took to learn the language. I said, well, about 35 years, because I was always on the lookout for new words and phrases and idioms and sayings, and I would write them down on a card and put them in my pocket, and I'd go over them and practice them when be at the stoplights, if I was driving, and just kept trying to soak it all in. And then I got to where I had a chance to do some writing. I wrote, after we went to the hospital, I wrote a book on how to be a Christian, because people were asking questions about how do you join up and what do you have to do after you become a Christian. And so I took some time out and wrote that, and got a chance to write some tracks and start using my writing skills I had. So it's just a matter of studying and practice, I would say. One of the important things for a new student is to please either go to a Thai church or listen to Thai preaching on the radio or tape or something, so your ears, they'll help you learn it. One thing I did enjoy in my second year studies, I had a teacher. I think she was related to the head teacher. She was a sweet girl, but she didn't seem to have as much skill or knowledge of teaching methods and so on. But one thing I asked her about, I said, now these little cards that we had to memorize, I said, those are important and we need to keep reviewing them. But I said that if it's okay with you, I would like to, after I do a set of cards, then I'd like to tell a joke in Thai, or see if I can tell one that sounds funny to you. And so she agreed to let me try. And I did tell several jokes, and she laughed at them. So the one that I remember telling her that it seemed to resonate with her, it was about an old Scotsman. Now, I think I have some Scots blood in me, and I kind of relate to this old guy, because he was in a small village, but when the new doctor came to town, and he was sick at that time, but he didn't want to go because he didn't want to spend any money. And but he finally decided he better go because he was getting worse. So when he got to the office there, he was talking with the receptionist, and he said, how much does Dr. John charge? And she said, well, he charges $5 for the first visit and $3 for every visit after that. So the old guy listened and nodded his head, and when they called him into the doctor's office, he just, normally he was very sour-faced and negative about everything, but he put on his jolliest look on his face and his big smile. He said, "Hoot, man, it's so good to see you again." End of joke. This young cowboy was kind of a smart aleck, and the old prospector was pulling into town with his mule, walking behind him, and so the cowboy, I forget, he had some smart alecky stuff to say, and he asked the old prospector, he said, "Old man, have you ever learned how to dance?" And so he pulled out his 6-shooter and started shooting down at the ground, and made the old man dance around, And so when he ran out of bullets, the old man pulled the mule over there. He said, "Young man," said, "have you ever learned to kiss a mule?" End of story.
I think there was a shotgun involved that didn't get mentioned.
I'm sure there's several things. I mean, I'm 89 years old. What do you expect? I might tell another thing about language school if you want a little more humor. One day, this was in probably about the middle of my second year. No, it was toward the end of my first year. During our 5-minute break, the school was in an old building owned by the Sapa Christak, and it had nice lawns. I mean, and so I was out behind just walking around relaxing my brain. And the Thai lady gardener was cutting the grass. And she didn't have a power mower, she didn't have a push mower. She had a knife, and she was cutting it like this, down, squatting down. And she was doing a beautiful job. And I was totally appreciative, and thinking about what a good job she was doing. And she noticed I was standing there, and she said, Kun matamarai tini, what are you doing here? And I said, Pom Marian Pasa Thai Krap. I was very polite to her. I said, I'm here studying Thai. She looked with a very quizzical, questioning look, and she said, Kun Marian Pasa Thai Ru? Is that what you're doing here? Are you really studying Thai? I said, Krap, Pom Marian Pasa Thai Krap. She said, Meh. Said, Look, Chai Chan มีอายุ5 ขวบเท่านั้นหนูยังไม่ได้เข้าโรงเรียนแต่พูดภาษาไทยเก่งกว่าครูอีกเยอะ My little boy's only 5 years old. He's never even been to school, but he speaks Thai a lot better than you do. So I realize I need to keep studying, and working at it. Mom always warns me about now, don't get off on talking about Thai, because you could just talk all day about how it's different from English and how beautiful it is, and so on and so forth. And there is a lot you could say about how many letters in the alphabet. And I made up this sentence, which is a true sentence. My, 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 my. My, 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 Thai, my. Now, you don't use that very often. I don't know if I've ever used it except to illustrate, but said the new wood of the new widow lady does not burn. The new silk cloth of the new widow lady does burn. Yes or no? So that's an actual sentence, but it illustrates all the difference in the tones, and the length of the syllables and things like that. Now, the one I sent to Bob that kids like is Cry Kai Kai Gai Nai Kai Kwai. Now, I added those last two parts. Cry Kai Kai Gai, that's the one somebody taught us early on. Who sells chicken eggs? But I added Nai Kai Kwai. Cry Kai Kai Gai Nai Kai Kwai. Who sells chicken eggs in the buffalo camp? The kids love that one. I mean, they love to try to learn that, and say it.